Agent Investor Livestream. We've got a really special show for you. Of course, you guys are listening to Agent Investor, the only brand that helps agents get off the real estate roller coaster. And most of you know I was an agent just like everybody who's listening right now. And it wasn't until I did my first investing deal that my income stopped going every month up and down and up and down. And so a lot of what we talk about is investing passively. And for me, investing passively really started when I first read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, long story short, they basically just said buy assets, the cash flow, get a really good property manager, close your eyes, sit back, and you're going to be wealthy. And a lot of what we try to do at Agent Investor is prevent everybody who's listening from making some of the mistakes that we've made. And Bob DeVito, who managed a lot of our small multifamily properties when we own them, we're going to be talking about kind of nightmare situations and nightmare stories about owning small multifamily. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we moved more towards apartments than small multifamily. And I talked a little bit about that last week, but I really want to get into the stories and the types of stuff that you actually see on a day-to-day basis when you're managing these types of properties in and around the greater Boston area. And if you're listening in another part of the market, another part of the country, just know that most areas where you're going to cash flow, you're going to run into similar situations. Like you're not buying cash flowing assets in the highest end areas. So without further ado, Bob, welcome to Agent Investor.
Good to be here.
Nice. All right, let me move this mic kind of in between us. It will pick up good sound. But so before we talk about you kind of like managing our properties, what made you going back when you first started your property management company, get into property management, and do you kind of know what you were getting yourself into when you first got the idea to run a property management company?
Yeah, I think I knew what I was getting into, but I got into it because I like dealing with people, not typical, like you, I was selling and not loving, the traditional real estate selling, to regular homeowners, regular buyers. That type of emotion was not good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't love it, not warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
So I kind of worked my way into a distressed type of market with bank property short sales, which led me into, I met a lot of investors in that market,
Mm-hmm.
which led me to selling them multifamilies, them not wanting to manage them or wanting to sell them immediately because the tenants were killing them.
Yep.
So I started managing properties, and the more I was selling, the more I was getting, properties to manage. So that's kind of how it started, probably in 2007. When the foreclosure market was really, really shitty. Well, it
Mm-hmm.
was good, but the regular market was shitty, and people were buying multis then, in some of our, more distressed cities for 30, 40, 50,000.
Yeah.
So on paper, they looked great. They were cash flowing monthly, yearly numbers looked great. Everything looked really good for them on paper, which is why they bought, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's going to kind of probably be a little bit of a theme kind of throughout what we're going to talk about, which is like there's a big difference between reading the book Rich Dad Poor Dad and saying, "Hey, buying asset, anywhere, doesn't matter, make sure that it works on paper and it's going to work for you in real life." There's
Mm-hmm.
another thing to actually operate those assets and have them work for what you're looking for. And at the end of the day, what most people who are listening right now are looking for is passive income, meaning like you're owning an asset, it's throwing off monthly income, and you're not having to really deal with a lot of day to day stress or headache or hassle. And it's crazy, like some of the prices that you're talking about, because I remember, properties like in areas like Haverhill and Lawrence, and I'm sure like that was kind of the neck of the woods that you're talking about for 30, 40, $50,000 multifamilies buying three families in Lynn for $100,000. And again, no matter what, really, no matter what part of the market that you live in, there were distressed assets during that 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11 kind of like 4 to 5 year window that you could buy discounted that didn't just look okay on paper, they looked really good on paper.
Right.
So, with that being said, you sold some of these to people, and then you said that sometimes they wanted to sell them immediately. Like, why would somebody who bought this asset, the cash flows on paper, that's going to make them a millionaire down the road, like, want to sell immediately?
Well, I think most people go into this. This is the way that I dealt with a lot of the investors, is they go into it, and I think most investors think, if I can buy one or two or three houses, own them for 30 years, if you get them for 80,000 in 30 years, the tenants will pay them off.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be worth whatever, a half a million, and I'll have 1.5 million sitting there
Mm-hmm.
with three properties, except for the fact that it doesn't really go that smoothly, because all of these people who bought had that dream.
Mm-hmm.
They all thought, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave these houses to my kids, whatever they're going to do, or it's going to be their retirement. Started getting phone calls, started dealing with tenants. And of course, when you buy well-priced homes, they don't come with good tenants.
Yes.
It's just reality. So all of them, pretty much 99% of these people, within 6 months will just call me, say, can you dump it back on the market? And, me, I would just think to myself, like, all right, I know what it said on paper. And I would always tell, like, it's not real what you're seeing on paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's just made up shit. Like, could it be real in the perfect scenario? Yes, nothing's perfect. So when they would call me, I'd be like, all right, you're not making the $2,500 a month you thought you were making, but you're still making $800. Like, is that okay? And the answer was always absolutely not. For the problems that I'm having.
Yeah.
And especially in our state, in Massachusetts, and a lot of states are like this, where you just can't not get paid on the first and evict on the second. It just doesn't work that way.
I know that's another thing that I think in a lot of these books, very, educational type stuff, they don't talk about a few things. And I think one thing they don't talk a lot about in a lot of them is the tenant landlord laws by state, and how they vary, and how that dictates kind of a lot. So on that kind of segue, like, what does happen? Say in a state like Massachusetts, and there's a lot of states that are out there, you can look up like how tenant friendly or landlord friendly an area is. But in a state like Massachusetts, let's say that somebody doesn't pay you, what is the real process for getting that unit vacant? How long does it take? What are you going through and stuff like that?
Well, it all depends on the tenant and how good they are at manipulation, right? So if someone doesn't pay you on the first, it's so, you wait. So once you get to the 15th, you have options. You can send them a 14-day notice and hope they pay you at that point, or you can just send them an eviction notice. But, if it's January 15th and I send them a 30-day notice, it doesn't take effect till March 1st. So when March 1st comes, if they don't pay, we file again, and then we get a court date. And when you go to court in Massachusetts, all they want you to do is negotiate. So they're not going to say, hey, yeah, I'm giving you a week to get out to the tenant. They want you to negotiate, meaning, okay, we're into, the end of March now. So how about if you give the tenant, you sit with the tenant, and there's someone who's negotiating just sitting there with you, and they want you to give them, okay, I'll give you till May 1st to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they'll pay you, maybe they won't, depends on your agreement with them. If you want them to pay, you might have to give them the June 1st. But when May 1st comes, they're either out, or you have to file again, and then you can get the final eviction, which is going to cost you again to get, the moving company there, to get the locksmith there, to get all of the things that need to happen to get them actually out of the property. Because if they wait till the last day and they don't leave, the constable knocks on their door, and if there's shit in there, you can't throw it out. You got to put it in storage. Yeah. So, there's a lot. I mean, it can take many, many months, again, depending on the tenant, depending on many different factors with the tenant. If they're young and they're smart, they can push it and push it. If they're elderly, the court's not going to let you, throw an elderly person or someone with a young baby out in the street. So you do need to take that into consideration. So it's just cost, right? It's
Yep.
holding costs. So a regular investor, sometimes they can't handle that.
Yep.
Or even if an investor's coming out with, when they came out with the giving people ability to be owner occupied in 3s and 4 families through FHA, they can move in that house and 3 tenants can stop paying them. Can they afford to make that payment when they're pretty much approved based on the rents?
Yep.
So, that's the house hack that everybody talks about, right? Like,
Yep.
oh, first time buyer, get 3.5% down, buy your first 4 family, live in it for a year, move out, rent, and again, sounds great
Yeah.
if you get the perfect tenants, and not a lot of them.
Yeah, there's so many different things that you said that I want to kind of touch on. The first is that one of the reasons that we've shifted away from small multifamily, and I'm purposely telling this story as of where we're recording right now, May 2023, is back when you were selling these properties, short sales, foreclosures, whatever. People were paying $100,000 for these same assets that were throwing off less rent, but there was way more cash flow. Whereas, like in May 2023, people are buying these assets on paper, having a few $100 of cash flow, hoping, and they need every single person to pay them every single month, or there's going to be a problem. And,
Right.
and it's just such a different thing. Where when I look kind of at the risk profile of flipping a house or buying an asset or building something or whatever, it's the risk profile has never been so high because the margins to actually do this are so low. Like, you miss a few payments, and a lot of times people who are doing the house hack, they're out at that point. Like
Right.
they can't do it. But then the other thing, we have here real life tenant horror stories. And just for the people who are listening, how common is it for that situation to happen? Like, say that you buy a 3 family with two tenants in there. How common is it for there to be either 1 or 2 non-paying tenants, and for that tenant to go through that process of not, kicking the can down the road?
Well, I think it depends how you're buying, right? So, and I'm sure you remember, I used to text you all the time, like, can you just buy a fucking house in a good, like in like downtown Boston,
Yep.
so I can get, a $4,000 a month college student in there, and you're just like, the numbers are just not even close there.
Yeah.
And so, as far as how common, it's very common when you're getting deals, because like when you first started investing, what was the cap rate? 10? Like you wouldn't have, people wouldn't have, investors
Oh,
wouldn't even look at a
I
property.
wouldn't look under 10
Right.
for sure.
And I think
Yeah.
in the way that and I could be wrong on this, I don't know, but probably not because I'm usually not. But I think in reality, once they started letting people, regular owner occupieds, buy the 3s and 4s, and I think and I have to go back in the timeline, but I'm pretty sure that's when the cap rates shit the bed.
100%. And it wasn't even just that, though. It was that inventory is so low now that a lot of people are house hacking, maybe not because they want to, but because that's the only thing they can qualify for. Whereas back then, say the areas you're talking about, you could buy a Haverhill multifamily for under $100,000, but you could also buy a really nice Haverhill single family for in the 200s.
Right.
So you didn't really, most people had the choice back then to say, do I want to buy a multi? Do I want to live in a single? Whereas now, a lot of times it's like, well, I can't afford the single, so I have to live in the multi, and that crushed cap rates for sure.
Right.
But you're right though. I mean, going back to that period of time, what I did wrong is instead of me saying, hey, that Boston multifamily that you're talking about only cash flows a couple $100, but there's going to be less hassle and headache and stress, and the rents are going to increase over the period of time, and it's a lower cap rate, just chasing the highest cap rate. And that's kind of like another mistake. I don't know if we just froze or not. Let me see if this comes back. So guys, if you guys can type in whether or not we just froze, I'm gonna try to check on my end just to make sure. No, looks like we're still going.
Still going?
Something about the screen. All right, so it looks like we're still here.
Still going. Still going?
All right.
Okay.
Sorry about that. All right, let me reset this. Was definitely one of the mistakes that I made, which is that always just chasing high cap rates, which is another thing that I think, academically, when you look kind of, you read a book or you listen to something and you're always, fighting for that. But that's something I wish I had kind of done in hindsight, is going after maybe lower cap rate assets, which is what we're doing now, and not necessarily, fighting to get the highest yield we possibly can, or highest cash flow that we can on a month-to-month basis.
Right.
So, we talked about non-payment and obviously the challenges that face, and that it's not that uncommon, and that depending on the area, it can happen a lot longer than others. But just to give people some perspective, you kind of highlighted like maybe a 6 to 8 month window where somebody might not be able to pay you and not move. But in terms of like nightmare horror story type things, what was the longest that somebody didn't pay us? I can think of one specifically, but how long did it go on for and why?
I think the longest was 10 Blossom in Chelsea.
Yep, that's what I was thinking too.
Common.
Yep.
That lady threatened my life at least 50 times, but she was just very aggressive. The city, every day she went to the city. I mean, every single day. And the city used to call me every single day saying, you need to get, I'm like, I can't get her out if you keep filing complaints that are not real, because she's forcing you. And the way that the city works is if someone files a complaint, they have to follow up on it, whether it's real or not. So it's just the way the city operates. So she would go every day. My floor's this, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. They would show up a couple of days later. Oh yeah, it's all good, it works. Close it out. She'd file another one. And she did that. God, that had to be almost a year and a half it took us to get her out.
Yeah.
And, we couldn't do anything because she was so disruptive to the building. It was a 3-family. The other tenants ended up leaving because she was just a nightmare. She ended up buying a dog, a big fucking dog, like a Rottweiler. Like, that dog was scary as shit. And she literally, I want to say, would call me probably 3 to 4 times a week and try to record me. Like, she would try to catch me and stuff, and she would always tell me, "Oh, I'm recording you, just so you know." And she would try to catch me. Of course, I never said anything to her, but she was probably the biggest nightmare tenant that I've ever seen, just because she knew how to do everything to prolong the eviction. And we had a lawyer who would go in, who was doing the eviction for us, and nothing she could do.
So, and how often, like, if you could put maybe a percentage on it, what percentage of the tenants fit into that box where they were doing everything possible to be a problematic, not pay, and all that stuff?
Well, I think originally when you bought the buildings, almost all of them, because they all knew, they were all grossly under rented in, buildings that were not very well kept up. Some of them were, a lot of them weren't. So pretty much all of the tenants, the minute that we would buy the properties, would file at the, because they knew we were going to send them an eviction or a rent increase. So they would all file with the city immediately, just, a complaint with the Board of Health. And once the complaint gets filed, you can't serve them anything. You have to fix the complaint. And and this is, I think, the part that a lot of people don't understand is, like, I remember you bought from one guy, remember Freeman Street?
Haverhill, yeah, all the Haverhill properties.
And
Yeah.
you bought two fours next to each other. You bought the one on Jackson Street. You bought a bunch from that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he did nothing for 20 something years. And the tenants called the city all the time on him. They never forced him to do anything. He knew somebody very well down there, obviously. And the tenants would tell me, yeah, that we call the Board of Health, they drive by and keep driving. The day we bought it, the day that you bought it, we got a notice from the city.
Yeah.
And we had to do so much shit in them buildings.
I know that's another thing that you know, I kind of forget some of this stuff because it's dealing with tenants, but then it's also dealing with the repairs that need to be made and going back to the type of assets that are being bought. And again, we're speaking maybe a little bit more in New England, but most multifamilies in New England were built 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And even the ones that were renovated 15 years ago probably still need work today. And then the codes keep getting updated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, this is, you know, not to go into this direction right now, but these are just all reasons why we're now doing new construction apartments. You know, talking about being in better areas, talking about having like they're just brand new, talking about not inheriting any tenants, us being the ones that are kind of like putting them in the buildings versus, just inheriting, people. And that's another thing that I think is kind of a negative about buying multifamily today. Whereas when you were selling those properties in 07, 08, 9, and 10, a lot of them were vacant.
Oh, yeah.
A lot were completely vacant.
Almost all of them, yeah.
Most of them were vacant. So, and I remember most of the properties that we bought were vacant. And as time went on, all the vacant properties, all the foreclosures, all the short sales, they kind of just went away. And they're not there today. And so what was left over, maybe going back to like 2015, 16, 17, you'd be lucky if you could get maybe a 3-family with 2 people out.
Right.
But a lot of times you were buying it maybe with 2 tenants in there. And then we got to a point, there was one point, I don't remember what year it was, maybe 2017 or 18, where we just said, we're not buying any more buildings with all tenants in them.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kept making, adjustments all the while, we kept pushing out like the areas we were buying in. We started out in, relatively commutable to Boston, and then we started going further and further out. How would you kind of like compare and contrast talking about areas that it's a little bit more landlord friendly? How would you compare New Hampshire to Massachusetts just in that capacity?
It's a much easier in New Hampshire to evict people. But I think it's like anything else. Like if New Hampshire is a lot of suburban, a lot of land. There's not a lot of multis except for very few cities. I mean, there are scattered like every city, but like I think you guys went up to Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
It's the heroin capital of the world.
Yep.
And we found that out relatively quickly. I think you bought a 12 unit and a 6 unit you bought a 6 on West Street, and then you bought the 12. I can't remember the name of the other street. So you bought 18 units with intention of, continuing on. But, that was a friggin' night. The day you bought West Street, I got a call from the cops just telling me, like, we're monitoring your building, just so you know. And there's 2 heroin dealers in there.
Yep.
And then the rest of the people in there were either in rehab for heroin or, not in rehab, still actively using it. So not the best area, but, if you're going to buy for value, that's where you're going to be.
And that's the thing, again, getting back to like what is going on today in the market. It's like those are the areas where you almost have to buy to even have a prayer at cash flowing. So if you're going to buy in those areas, now you have all of these other problems that you have to deal with. And we just decided, maybe it was like 2019, somewhere in that vicinity, that we just said, we're going to sell pretty much all of these small multifamilies that we have and just push into the bigger developments, for these reasons. And getting back to kind of, why everybody's here. Everybody's here because they want passive income. They want to have a nice life. They want to be on the, theoretically on the beach, earning money, not having a job, just, collecting rents. what would you say, like, as you're managing these properties? Because you're managing them, right? So your objective is handle all the problems and maybe not necessarily bring them to us. With these types of properties, why isn't that necessarily possible? Like, why couldn't you just manage them, take care of stuff, and leave us out and us just kind of collect checks?
Because there's a lot of money involved with repairs, with when the city sends me anything, I'm not on it. I'm the property manager. So if Bill's on it or you're on it, I have to let you know. Like, we got this notice, you know, here's what I'm going to do. It's not a big deal, but it is a notice. So we have to take care of it. And, if we get 30 days to fix something and the tenant doesn't let us in, sometimes they give you an extension, sometimes they don't. So they send you a notice to go to court. Well,
Mm-hmm.
they don't send it to me. They send it to me, but it's, your name or bill on it. So I need to tell you. But the bigger thing is cost. I can't spend thousands of dollars. Well, I can, but you probably wouldn't have liked that. So I need to let you know, like, oh, well, if I call you or I text you a bill and I'm like, this property needs, $3,000, like, I'm getting a phone call. Like, why?
Yeah.
Well, this is why. Well, are you sure? Did you get multiple? Like, that's a lot of money. Yeah, it is, but it needs to be done. So, you can't really just be out of it
Yeah.
unless you just don't care about money.
Right. And I think, all of these things, like all of the problems, whether it's that money needs to be spent or somebody needs to be dealt with or the police are being called, it's like a lot of them have to go up to the owner. And it makes it where it's not passive. Decisions on whether you're going to evict or not evict, or how much you're willing to spend, or are you going to give somebody cash for keys? How much are you going to offer them? Just all of that stuff. Are we going to renovate the properties after the people move out or not, or what type of renovation is going to be there? So they're just extremely intensive, time intensive, capital intensive. And we bought them at the right time. We bought them when the market was low. We bought them when you could cash flow pretty well on them. And of course, this is going to sound like I'm very anti small multifamily, but I just think that until you can buy small multifamily in areas that are worth holding, in areas that you feel good about holding them, like I wouldn't be a huge advocate of doing it, um, at least as of right now. Um, what are some other just like specific, horror story or nightmare, tenants or situations that you were involved with when dealing with our properties?
Well, I think as a property manager, like, so if you get a three family or a four family, which is all you guys bought, I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
had a few twos in the beginning, but you sold them immediately. But like, there's two types of people in there. There's either a group that's all together as one, and they're against the landlord and they're for themselves, obviously, or there's people in there that are constantly fighting each other. Neither one of them's good for you
Yeah.
as a landlord because, if they're all together, they know what each other's doing. If one of them gets a notice to up rent, the other one start fucking with you or doing whatever they're gonna do. Or, if they're all against each other, it's just constant calls of, okay, this one's doing this, they're on my thing, or they're leaving their shit in the hallway, they're leaving stuff in the basement, they're not supposed to be in there. So there's always, that part of the business is I mean, the property management business and a landlord yourself is kind of a negative business. You
Mm-hmm.
don't get calls
Yeah.
saying hello. You only get calls saying there's a problem. No matter what time of day it is, you have to fix it. And whether it's 8 in the morning or midnight, there's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But, as far as I mean, there's so many, I mean, horror stories are just, I mean, I'm gray from these properties, truthfully. But there's a million horror stories. But I think the biggest thing for me as a manager was just, you know, seeing how good tenants are because people look at tenants and whether they're on a program or they're working at CVS and holding two jobs and 7-Eleven at night, they know how to survive. Like, this is their house,
Mm-hmm.
this is where they live, and they know how to play the system.
Mm.
And I think, and the other thing in Massachusetts is when you walk into most courtrooms for an eviction, there is free lawyers for tenants. They don't have
Yeah.
to afford them. They can just walk up to the table and say, I want representation. And next thing you know, you're in court against a lawyer when you wouldn't think you would be.
Yeah.
Because you'd say, oh, they don't have enough money to afford a lawyer. They don't need any money. In Massachusetts, they just get a free lawyer.
Mm.
So, there's a million stories of, different things happening, fires, people shooting heroin on the back porch in front of children. People, in Peabody, when you had the Foster Street house, I mean, I'm getting calls from the cops every other day. We had a couple of tenants in there who were shooting up constantly, leaving their needles all over the place. That was an 8-unit building. The other tenants had children. They're picking up needles. They're doing, all this stuff. It's crazy. The bed bug store, like you had that building in Peabody. We had a decent couple living in there. She left him, and he started being a little bit late on his rent. So I was at knocked on his door one day, and I walked in. All he had was an air mattress,
Mm.
and this guy, he was probably in his 30s, but his body was covered from head to toe with scabs. I'm like, what the hell's going on with you? He's like, I don't know, but I'm itchy this. So I'm looking. He has no furniture, has like a single air mattress with like a cover on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, kid, it looks like you're getting bit by something. And he lifts up his thing. There was more bed bugs than I could ever see. Now, this had been going on for like 6 months.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got to tell me this shit. Like it's definitely already spread to at least one unit.
Yeah.
I mean, bed bugs move slowly, but we ended up having to treat the whole building. I ended up having to evict him. We ended up getting him out. But little shit like that, like tenants, he's not going to call me and tell me because he's afraid to get evicted.
Mm.
So instead, he sleeps with bed bugs. And I'm telling you, it was caked. It was disgusting. But, little things like that, they just happen.
Mm.
And I think the bigger thing is just people underestimating the street smarts of the tenants that they have.
Yeah.
And like I said, these people they just know how to survive. They know how to play the system, and they're good at it.
Yeah. It is crazy. So what would you say, I guess, to somebody what type of personality do you need to have in order to even make these work?
Well, I think the biggest thing is you can't really care. Like you can't be looking at money as like the if you look at money as like it's everything to you, it's a tough business because you are going to spend money, you are going to lose certain months, and I think a lot of people
Do you think that you need to have like good cash reserves in order to
I think you really do.
Yeah.
And I think you have to have a pretty laid back personality, and you have to understand people are people. Shit happens. Your best tenant could be your worst tenant with a job loss, a breakup, a family member dies. Who knows? Anything could really, send someone in a spiral, and you could, be moving along for 3 months. Everyone's paying, someone, your best tenant, all of a sudden he can't pay you. He lost his job. The other people in the building hear about it, and they're like, oh, he ain't paying. He's causing a fucking ruckus. I ain't paying. Shit happens. Like,
Yeah.
I think when I was selling all of your properties for you, it was kind of funny because the agents who have these investor buyers, a lot of these people are newer because of the whole FHA scenario who are buying the 3s and 4s, and they don't really tell them the truth. They just look at the numbers and they say, oh, this house is great. You'll live here. You'll get this. You'll only pay $200 a month for your mortgage. And these people buy, and I don't say shit. I'm selling the property. Like it's not my job.
Yeah.
And almost every single one of them would call me after and be like, well, the tenant stopped paying. Not my problem. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? Oh, like I either raised their rent immediately, or I told them they can't use this space anymore. They can't. They
Yeah.
changed their lifestyle.
Yep.
And people get pissy about it.
I know. I think that's like, again, I almost feel like I would love to see kind of the statistics on it, but I can almost guarantee that a lot of these small multifamilies, most of them just keep changing hands. Like I don't know what the statistics are, the average length of time that people kind of hold on to them for. And again, like you said, every single person, including us, goes into it thinking, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to own it not for 30 years. I'm going to own it for 50 years.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand it down to my kids. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, one of the things that Bill said to me that actually made us sell was he said, okay, we're doing, decent financially, whatever. Do you want to hand these properties to our kids? And that was the first time I actually thought about that and thinking, with the original thought, okay, this is passive. My kids can inherit or like, eventually pass on these great assets to them. And then thinking they're not great assets.
Right.
They're not even close to great assets. And while they can make money, and we made money on them, we did make money on them. And of course, like over the years, they got paid down. When we did sell them, we fortunately the market went up, and we bought them at the low point, which is again another reason why I'm not necessarily a big advocate of going all in on these today because the market's high
Mm-hmm.
and you're buying them on thin margins. If you're not, to me, with these type of assets, if you're not getting a good price and you're not going to get appreciation, and you're only going to make, two, three, $400 a month, and you're going to own that for 7 or 8 years. When you look back, you're going to be like, wow, you might have even lost money potentially on them. Because I don't want to say we got bailed out, but a lot of the benefit that we got from owning them was through the mortgage, the principal pay down and appreciation combined,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily like the operations of them, which is again another thought that I think that a lot of people have in the beginning. They're like, I'm buying this property, a cash flow is 500 a month. I buy 10 of these. Now I get 5,000 a month. That's the
Right.
salary.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, like it just doesn't work like that. And there's months where you're completely negative or having to fix something. There could be a year where you're completely negative, and it just you definitely need the reserves, I think, and you need to have like a very long term mindset and just deal with it as it's kind of going on.
Yeah. I think to buy how you bought, you do have to have a lot of reserves because there
Yep.
is, you're getting a steep discount, because of how you buy. And there's a reason, obviously. Nothing comes that, steep of a discount without there being a lot of issues. And, you guys obviously have, multiple businesses. You could handle the upfront. And a lot of those buildings, because of how they were, condition wise or just tenant wise, was 6 to 8 months of nothing coming in.
Yeah.
And then when we finally got them clear, then you had to spend the money to upgrade the units so we could rent them to, people who would appreciate them. So,
Yeah, it's funny. Deb said, scaring the bejesus out of me, but it's like, this is not like these are not exaggerated. Nothing we have said is even 1% exaggerated. In fact, I'm sure like if I push Bob more, we get more crazy stories out of him that are like stuff that you don't want to hear. And I'm sure he's, in the back of his head, like, hey, this is live and, public and whatnot. So I'm not going to probably, go into, super detail, but this isn't like scaring. This is actual reality. And again, this is the reason, like if this stuff works seamlessly without, any issues, like I would be doubling down on them because again, on paper, all of this stuff works really, really well. It's just that in real life, like there's a reason it's called buy and hold.
mhm,
Buying it, but really where you're making the money is holding it. And the longer that you can hold it, the better you're going to do. And if you're in so much pain during the holding period that you have to sell it, then it doesn't work. And
right,
that's why, you had so many clients that you sold multifamilies to calling you whatever it was a short period of time later, just being like, hey, can we dump these back? And most of the people that we bought these from were dumping them to us. They were dumping, like you said, their problem to us that we were inheriting. And, going into it, bright eyed and bushy tailed, like be like, hey,
yeah,
I can't believe they sold this
yeah,
thing. And then you're like, oh, this is why they sold it.
Yeah, and I think it is good for some people to buy one or two houses. If you can afford to buy and put a good chunk down in some good areas or next to a college where you're going to get, almost guaranteed rents from the parents. I mean, you're going to dealing with college students, and that's its own little issue. But at least you're going to get paid.
Yeah.
And people always say, one of the biggest things I always heard was, well, it's okay. Like I'm just going to put, programs in
Hmm.
and they pay fair market or slightly above fair market. And that's okay. But, we did a lot of that. I think,
Yeah.
at one point at the peak of all of your units, we probably had 60% programs.
Yep.
And those people, oh God, they are not great. The payments came in,
Hmm.
but the aggravation and the repairs and all of the other shit, and don't get me wrong, there are some good people. I'm not saying all of them, but you know, a good majority of them were just not good
Hmm.
tenants, period. And yeah, we did get paid every month, but that was another, and again, when you deal, this is the way I look at it, like when you deal with government, and we kind of both know how I feel about government, but when they decide they want to do something, like we were in the middle of all of that. And some people who live in Mass will probably remember this, but a lot of programs were housing people in hotels. And they were, the hotels were getting their rooms filled, and the government was paying them like they pay a regular landlord. And then at one point, they stopped. They stopped doing that. So all of them inspectors that would go to the hotels, because when you're in a program, they inspect minimum once a year. So we had our group of inspectors, the hotels had their groups. All of a sudden, they stopped renting to hotels. All them inspectors had nothing to do. So instead of the
Yeah.
government saying, hey, we should, get rid of this and save some money, they moved them all over to the other programs that we were all in. And all of a sudden, I'm getting calls every other week, like they're inspecting properties every 3 months now. And, all they're really looking for is safety issues. But, they start talking to tenants start listening to them. And all of a sudden, now the tenants are like, oh, like, the corner of my floor is up. I need you here, within 24 hours to fix it. Well, I don't have a guy in that area till, Friday. It's Monday. Not going to happen. I got to take him off another job, send him there. It's just cost.
Hmm.
And everything, as time went on, costs start going up, which not affecting me, it's affecting you or any landlord.
So another comment just came in, and I think it addresses kind of a bigger point. The question was, is it better to stick to individual condo units? And this is kind of the types of questions that we help analyze for people that are in the inner circle. If you have not booked a call to talk to me about things like this, I would highly recommend you do so. You can do that at www.agentinvestorinnercircle.com. If you're interested in getting help and mentorship and coaching from us, that's the first step to get on a call with me to see if we can help you. Again, you can go to www.agentinvestorinnercircle.com, because the answer to that question, is it better to stick with individual condo units, or is it better to do multifamilies, or is it better to invest passively, or is it better to just fix and flip, or is it better to buy short-term rentals? That's an individual question that I can't answer with knowing a bunch more details about you specifically. I mean, I can talk globally about how I feel about condos, and the one thing to keep in mind with all of this stuff is that there's pretty much pros and cons to each thing. So you have to really think about, like, what is your objective? And that's why when people join the inner circle, we walk you through a 5-step process to figure out where you're at today, where you want to be in 5 to 10 years. And then the third thing that we talk about is, what's your investment vehicle? Like, are you going to flip? Are you going to wholesale? Are you going to buy small multifamilies, condos? Are you going to invest passively, just earn income and then invest in deals? Because depending on who you are, what stage of life you're in, what you're trying to achieve, that can be different. Like, and I'll just address the condos just really quickly. The first thing about condos is that you'll have a really, really hard time in 2023 finding condos that are going to cash flow, unless you're just buying them cash, or you're doing something to pay down, the note as much as you can. Um, the good thing about condos is that, the exterior and, a lot of them snow removal and plowing and all that type of stuff is taken care of for you. So they're kind of by definition more passive. But the only negative there is that you typically have condo fees associated with them, which tends to make them a lot less profitable. And then you can get hit with assessments as well. But it depends. It all really truthfully depends. And as we're sitting here talking about like how bad it is to own small multifamily, there are going to be some people that I'm going to talk to that we're going to leave the call being like, hey, maybe you should do small multifamily. Maybe you're the right type of person. You have the right goals. You're buying in the right locations. You have the right amount, money, reserves, this, that. So every asset class is for a specific type of person, depending on who you are. Um, but I do think that like where we're kind of standing today, it's really hard to be profitable on passive income properties if you're not doing like the heavy construction apartments that we're doing. Like I think that there are a lot of negatives in a lot of pockets, whether it's short-term rentals and how overvalued those are, and how they're so tied to discretionary income. I could go up and down kind of the list, and that's why we're doing like I believe in what I'm doing because I've thought it out, and I'm not saying I'm always going to be right, but there's a reason why we're doing what we're doing, and there's a reason why we sold all of these small multifamilies because didn't it wasn't helping us achieve our long-term objectives. And I think the long-term objectives that we have are very similar to what most people want, which again is ownership of assets that are going to cash flow, appreciate over time, and provide you with the least amount of hassle that you can have with owning an asset, and keeping in mind that nothing is ever completely passive. So if you guys have any other questions, put them in the comment section. I'll take a look at them later today. Bob is definitely, a wealth of knowledge with the stuff. He's got a ton of experience with it. And, it's just, again, not that any of this stuff was to scare anybody, but it was just really like, you call it real talk. Like this is what people are talking about, like behind closed doors, like what you see when somebody's selling you a coaching program or what you see on YouTube or in a book. It's going to be like the fairy tale version of this stuff, literally. And, you have to be careful about kind of what you're doing and be smart about making sure that you know what you're getting into. And again, if you guys have any questions about, what asset class is the right class for you or your specific investing strategies, I would encourage you, to go today and book a call at www.agentinvestorinnercircle.com. The call is completely free, so there's no obligation to do anything after the call. You get a free strategy session, so you might as well take advantage of it. So thank you, Bob, for joining us.
Thank you.
We did have an issue with Bob last week. I tried to get him on. He was trying to use his flip phone to log in.
So bad area I was in.
Bad area. We tried to get him in the studio, and I do want to say just kind of something funny that I did mention in a Facebook post, but I don't think Bob saw it. Every time that Bob sends me a message or calls me, my daughter counts how many times he swears during the conversation. And she had one the other day. She said, "Oh, he only swore 2 times."
I was good today.
You were pretty good. Yeah, I think you were under 10, which could potentially be a world record for under an hour.
Yeah, I did well. So it's all good. But one last thing I will say is that what you did before worked for you at the time. Like that was a great strategy.
Yep.
And I think people have to understand that, like, you are, and I'm not pumping your tires because God knows you can do that on your own.
Yeah.
But like, when you switch to something, and I've known you for a long time, you and Bill, and you guys have always in front of everything. And if someone can do today what you did 10 to 12 years ago buying, good luck, and it will work in the, even short and long. Not sure that's possible anymore.
Yeah, and it may, and that's the interesting thing. Like a lot of people, when I talk to them about the stuff and saying like, it's not a good time to buy right now. I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, it will be a really good time in a year. It will be a really good time in 2 years. that may not happen. Like that literally, like you may never see three families in Greater Boston for under like, close to $1 million ever again. And I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying that like that just goes with like the shifting, right? Things change. Like everything always changes, and this is why like another really reason why like being in the inner circle is important because you want to be ahead of whatever the next trend is. And this
Mm-hmm.
is why like I talk about so many trends and I get really I don't know the right word, like enthusiastic almost about like the wrong trends because I can see them, from like a mile away. And I see like, so when everybody's saying buy Bitcoin, when everybody's saying do short term rentals, like it is not the right thing to do. I promise you. Like every person in the world doesn't have the right idea at the right time. What it usually means in almost all cases is that you're behind the curve.
Mm-hmm.
So for the people that are on now and they're like, oh, I want to do short term rentals, that ship sailed 5 years ago,
Right.
or whatever the time frame is. Like
Right.
that's gone. All the money that like getting in early with any of these ideas is where the money's made. Not getting in like when the last person is telling you like a stock tip, and that's what I feel like a lot of this stuff kind of is. It's like somebody looks at what we did 10 years ago and they go, "Well, Tom's telling me not to do it. Maybe he just doesn't want me to be successful." Like no, like that ship just sailed like multiple years ago.
Right.
Um,
Because I mean, I've told you 1,000 times, like, why are you doing, like, why are you giving away everything?
mhm.
Right. And I've said for at least 6 or 7 years, because, you are very honest for what you're doing. And, I never really understood it in the beginning. But, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And, everyone jumps on to make the little money afterwards. I'm going to sell a book, I'm going to sell a program, I'm going to do this. But as you said, it's too late then at that point. And I think since I've known you guys, you've always been doing things that no one else does. And people question it. I mean, it's natural to question, why would I believe you? Why would I do this? Well, at this point, you do have the track record of
Yeah,
being right, as hard as that is for me to say, and successful at it. So, the day I met you, I thought you were a typical investor.
yeah,
Like, here's another fucking guy who's telling me how great he's going to do. He's going to buy all this shit. And I remember thinking, I've met 50 of you in the
yeah,
last month.
yeah.
But the difference is you follow through and you actually achieved your goals.
The funny thing is though is like I probably thought back then I knew more than now. Like now, like I feel more confident to say kind of like, I don't know everything. I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen, but I do know that for the most part, we are putting a ton of thought into the stuff. And it's also like, for people being in our inner circle, we're passing along this information, but I've got my own inner circle of people that I talk to that, invest at a high level that we talk to each other. What's working for you in your market? What's working for you in your market? What do you think the best strategy is? And that isn't always a guarantee that it's going to produce the best result or the best thought. But I can tell you that like it a lot of times prevents you from doing stuff that just doesn't make any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and nothing's ever going to be perfect, but I think that the strategy itself, having the right strategy matters a good amount because you can be really good at a bad strategy that's not working in today's market and you'll still lose. Whereas, like, again, if you went back 10 years ago and you just started buying up like a bunch of multifamilies in Dorchester and Boston and, Lynn and whatever, like, you probably could have done a lot of wrong things, but still ended up on top, which is
Right.
why, we're having this discussion today where it's like, don't do the wrong strategy, even though it worked, at some point in the past.
Yeah. Good point. I love it.
All right, guys. So thank you for tuning in. We had a lot of people stay on to the very end, and I appreciate it. And www.agentinvestorinnercircle.com. Thank you again.